hold on. You also said that you answer you. What? You also
Relax,
said
Ashley, relax.
hold on. This kind of like I was like, whoa. Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Therapists Unmasked. My dear, thank you so much for coming. Please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you work, and what your views are on mental health.
Yeah. So my name is Daisy Macias. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I was born and raised in California, so that is where I practice out of. I am married. I have two boys, soon to be 13-year-old in a couple weeks, and an 8-year-old. And I most of my career I've been in medical social work. I would say maybe like 15 years, a little bit more, just medical social work. And then in the last year and a half, I stopped working in medical social work and like dedicated myself more to private practice in therapy. So that's where I've been for the last 4 years. I've been slowly, getting experience and getting exposed to therapy, and that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half. I am also certified in nutrition therapy, and that is something that I'm very passionate about in terms of bringing that in to therapy and talking about how nutrition impacts your body and your mind and how it's all connected. In terms of mental health, like my views on mental health, it's interesting because, when you're going to school, when you're an undergrad and grad school, you start gathering this idea that people who help other people have it all together. Like you have it all together, you're really stable, and you're the one that you're like that rock that everybody goes to. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of like the view I started off with when it came to mental health. Why it kind of, I think the idea of being a therapist was like, oh, I got my stuff together. Like, I'm very stable, so I'm going to be a good therapist. I'm going to be a good listener. And as time went on, my views of therapy and my views of mental health have changed a lot. And now I view it as like the thing that I feared the most was that people would find out that I don't have it all together and that I also have my struggles. And now it's something that I see more of like a superpower because I understand the struggle, because I know what it's like. Now I feel like I can make a difference and people can relate to me. And before it was like the opposite. Like I felt uncomfortable in the role because I was trying to keep it all together and not ever show any sign of struggle or not ever show any sign that I was just as human as you. And so that was to me like the turning point, like, wow, like the more I'm okay with my own struggle, the better I am as a therapist because the more I understand what to do because I do it for myself.
Wasn't that a lot of pressure though? Trying to show your clients that you have it all together.
Yeah, it's super hard. And I think it took away the fun of what we do because trying to keep it all together, trying to just stick to the book, and what we were taught in grad school, and compose yourself and all that. Yes, it's helpful, but it is a lot of pressure and it takes away that the fun part of helping other people, which is relating to you. You having to have like your guard up and or always feel like you have to pretend to be better or better put together than what you really are. And I think
Right.
that was hard for me, especially coming from a Latino household, right? Where it's like mental health is not real, like depression, anxiety is not real, that stuff's made up, and you just have too much time on your hands. So going to school to help people with something that I grew up always thinking wasn't even like it only happens to certain people, it doesn't happen to everybody. Not me, I'm well put together and my struggles are just that I'm bored or I'm this or I'm that. Like you're always putting an excuse to why you feel the way you feel. Um and not really accepting it. And then once I accepted it and once I started dealing with my own, it was like all of a sudden I was way better at what I was doing.
You mentioned that you have been through like some struggles, right? So like if you would please share whatever you're comfortable with, but like what are those mental health struggles that you've gone through that has motivated you to want to become a therapist?
Yeah, my mental health struggles really started when I was a kid. I was probably like 8 or 9, and I'm very open about it. I don't think I mentioned it before, but I have a podcast. It's called Healing Heridas. the Spanglish guide. And so a lot of what I do is talk about this was my story. This is how my parents handled it in our community, in the Latino community. This is what I learned, and this is what I would suggest you can try. It's kind of like giving you a little guide. If you are Latino, if you grew up in a Spanglish home, and um, you had mental health struggles, these can be, things that can help you, or maybe you went through something similar. So I want to be relatable. So I don't have any issue talking about it. My struggle started when I was like 8 or 9. Looking back, it's like very textbook depression and anxiety, all the symptoms that I was showing. But my parents, they're from Mexico. They came here to the United States. They did the best with the tools that they had, with the resources that they had, but there was no real understanding of what was going on with their daughter. It was more like, this must be like empacho. I don't know if you've ever heard of empacho.
Yes.
Okay, like empacho, we're gonna cool your skin, or we're gonna give you these teas. And a lot of those things were helpful. I'm not gonna lie, it was helpful. But in general, there was no real understanding that this is a progressive thing if you don't intervene, right? And so it was very hard growing up with depression, growing up with anxiety, and then with that shame, because it's not real in your household. So it's like, no, you're just bored. No, we just gave you too much. So now you don't appreciate life. So these reasonings that didn't make sense to me or didn't like sit well with me. And meanwhile, I was like really struggling with depression, really struggling with anxiety. And so it was like that growing up until I got old enough to realize, this is something that I need help with, and so having to reach out outside of my family unit for help was not easy, because of that stigma, right? Not only you're weak, or you're not trying hard enough, right? No le estás echando ganas, or you're not praying enough, or something's wrong, right? That's why you feel the way you are. So it was that feeling of being like the, but finally, getting that help. And I think that's what led me to the helping profession, because I saw it as an outside thing, but knew that I was internally struggling. And so I wanted answers. Like, I wanted answers. So what's going on with me? And I think that led me to the helping profession, and that led me to social work. And then that led me to therapy. And like I said, I always kind of feared therapy because I wanted to be put together. I wanted to be doing well. I didn't want to accept that these things are happening to me, but at the same time, I needed the help. So it just kind of all came together, and I eventually learned a lot about it. I started therapy, been in and out of therapy many times in my life, um, and then learned. I learned how to live with depression, how to live with anxiety, especially anxiety. I learned to befriend it because it is my friend, right? It's trying to keep me safe. And so it was a whole learning process. And every tool that I picked up for me helped me with my clients, helped me with the people I served, either in the medical field or in therapy. And in general, just people in my life tend to come to me instead of like their family members, because they know that I'm more open minded, and they know that I've experienced it, and that I'm open about what I experienced. Now I'm open about it. So I tend to have people come to me, and I like that. I like to be available, because there was a time in my life where I was like so desperate to feel better, and I felt so alone. And I don't want people to feel that way. And that's why I have the podcast. That's why I do the therapy. That's why I take the phone calls and the texts, even though I'm busy, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's because I don't want people to feel alone. And so that's kind of my story with mental health.
So when you got the help, right? What did your family think if or maybe you didn't tell them or did you tell them? Like what did they think when you got the help?
I did tell them. There was a lot of shame when I like exposed myself, that I was in therapy. And for them, it was kind of like, hey, well, if that's what you need, it was the Daisy thing. That's
Mhm.
what Daisy needs. Because Daisy's got a problem, and so we don't talk about it. They don't ask me they would not ask me what I talk about in therapy. They would not bring it up in family reunion. We don't talk about. And for people who talk about a lot of things, like chisme, it's just thing they would not talk about. I was like, no, we're not gonna bring that up. So it was like stigma and shame. And then I was the first one. in my nuclear family to look for help and to admit that, I'm having a hard time and I'm going to look for help outside of us. This is not going to stay within our little family unit. I'm going to go outside because I'm not having my needs met for what I need here, right? And so it it was it was okay. They accepted it, but there was shame.
So I'm wondering, like, did that cause any resentment for you that your family didn't ask you, like, how is it going? How are you feeling now?
Honestly, it was relief. It was relief that they wouldn't ask because a lot of what I talked about had to do with them, right? That's
Mhm.
where a lot of our trauma stems from.
Yep.
And I had a little bit of guilt that I was talking about my parents because I grew up in that household of be grateful for all the sacrifices that we've done for you guys, right? Look at all the hard work that we put into making
Yep.
sure you had a better life, and you're gonna go and talk to some person about it. So there was like a betrayal feeling of, oh, I'm betraying my family because I'm talking about my trauma, and even coming to terms that what I experienced was trauma, and that it was like emotional neglect and all these things. I remember the first time the therapist told me that, I got angry. Like, excuse me, like you know my parents, they're
Who do
good
you think
people.
you are?
Yeah, and then I remember the therapist, and it stands out to me because she was an older white woman, and so even because it was coming from her, I felt judged. Oh, you don't understand us. You don't know how Mexicans work. Your boundaries, come on, like. So there was a little resistance to the therapy because I didn't like what she was saying because I knew she was right, and I didn't want to hear it. Like I didn't want to hear that my perfect parents didn't do something right. It just made me feel like a bad daughter. And it took a long time to accept that they're not wrong and they're not bad and you're not bad. It's just they didn't have the tools, and adapting to a new country is hard, and having multiple kids is hard, and not having resources is hard. So it took a lot of time for me to get to a place where I had compassion for them, but also compassion for me. Like, it's okay that you're talking about these things. It doesn't make you a bad daughter that you had a negative experience growing up, or that you didn't have your needs met, or that you were neglected, or that it caused symptoms in you. And that's okay. So it took a long time to get there. It was a process.
I can imagine how hard it is. And for me as well, it's like I grew up with a Mexican father and a Uruguayan mother. So cultures are different. But
Yeah.
because we're very close to our Mexican side of the family, I grew up with a lot of Mexican traditions and household rules and all that. But what I was going to also ask you was, going to a therapist who does not know the culture versus going to a therapist who does know the culture, which one do you think would be easier to talk to? Because in one hand, there's somebody who you relate to, who knows exactly what you're talking about. And then on the other hand, there's somebody who is an outsider and doesn't know anything about the culture, but could also surprise you with their perspective.
Hey. I've thought about that many times in my life because I've had multiple therapists, males, females, and having a Latina therapist, which was my last therapist, Latina, it was totally different experience. Even with all these years of experience in therapy, when I came to her, it was like this resistance that I had been carrying around where yes, I would participate in therapy, and yes, I would get better, and I would take their suggestions into consideration, and I was open to it, I thought, but there was always a little resistance because underlying I was like, you don't get it. You don't get it. And so when I met the Latina therapist, and it was just like the resistance, I dropped it, that little shield just went down, and I could totally be myself, and it was a different experience, and that's where most of the healing has been. It's interesting that just being able to switch from Spanish to English when I was talking to her was enough to make me feel as good as like 4 or 5 sessions with somebody who doesn't speak like Spanish. So it was like that comfort because Spanglish is my comfort language. Like if I can switch, that's the best for me. And so when I only speak English, I feel a certain way. If I only speak Spanish, I'm like self-conscious. Did I say the word right? But if I can mix it, that's like my happy place, right? So I was able to do that in therapy. And then just having her understand where I'm coming from because she was also Latina, everything just kind of went smoother, and I didn't have that resistance that I was carrying around. You know,
Mm-hmm.
not to say that other people are not going to benefit from someone seeing a therapist that's not in your culture, because I did benefit, but it wasn't the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I really learned the difference between having like somebody who's culturally competent and then culturally humble. And I feel like to be culturally humble, you have to kind of understand the culture enough where you can ask the right questions. And if you're not of that culture, sometimes you're not as invested in learning about it because it's not your culture, or you don't see as many clients in that, you know, from that culture, so you don't invest as much and you don't ask the culturally appropriate questions, and makes the person feel kind of okay, well, you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So just having that Latina therapist for me made the whole difference.
Something I also wanted to ask, since we're on the topic of Latina therapists, I see a lot of Hispanic clients, like 90% Hispanic clients. And something
Yeah.
that I've noticed is that they come to me and everything that I say, they take my word for it 100%. They don't question anything. There's not much back and forth as there is with my American clients. Whereas the American clients, they see therapy and they're like, okay, this is my safe haven where I can talk and be fine. They see it, the Hispanic clients see it more as like a doctor's appointment. And they're just like,
Yeah.
sí, señora Franco, sí voy a hacer eso. Ay, muchas gracias, señora Franco. And stuff like that. I'm just like, am I doing something wrong? So I wanted to get your view on it, if that is something that you see as well.
Yeah, and you know what? I've seen it in the medical field as a medical social worker, and even in therapy. I do have a lot of Hispanic clients, and sometimes they're only Spanish speaking, and that's where I see it the most when they're only Spanish speaking. So much to the point where like I've had a few that they call me doctora, right? And I'm like, oh, no soy doctora, you know, I soy terapeuta, and they're like, and then again doctora, to the point where I don't even correct them anymore. Okay, because they see you as somebody that's so knowledgeable and so informative that you must have like a doctoral degree, you know, like. And so yes, it's true. There's less resistance, and there's like more appreciation for your interventions and when you give them feedback. And then I come back the next week and they're like, oh, I tried that thing you said. There's more of that versus people who are not Hispanic, or they were born here in the United States. They might have a little bit more resistance, or they might, like you say, question and say like, no, I don't think that's gonna work, or it's more of a back and forth. So I have noticed that with clients, not with like family, because they don't care what I know. They're like, they just doesn't know anything. But with the clients, it's like, yes, like they put you up in a pedestal, like you're so knowledgeable, and I'm just gonna follow what you're saying.
With that being said, what is the population that you primarily work with?
Um, right now it's a little bit of everything, but primarily it's that first generation Latina that I'm the most comfortable with, and that I tend to work with the most. But I do, it's a little bit of everything, but that is my population where I feel the most comfortable and the most relatable. And I feel like I do the best work.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Surprisingly enough, veterans as well. And I don't know why, since I don't have any special training with veterans, but that seems to be a population that I do really well with. And I feel they do well because I tend to have an approach that uses the body, like a lot of somatic kind of work, the mind body connection. That's like something that I'm very passionate about. I have a history of like health issues that I was able to manage and make better with nutrition choices, and surprise myself when my mental health got better once I made all these changes in my diet. And so I try to incorporate that education into therapy as well. Because as much as you come to therapy and you work out and you're doing all the interventions, if you're not taking care of your body and you're eating processed food, things with artificial colors and preservatives, you have vitamin deficiencies, your gut is all messed up and out of balance, then the fact is that you're gonna have a really hard time healing, a very,
Mm-hmm.
very hard time healing. And I feel like it's a disservice, and if I don't explain that, because it has enough research now, where every single client I see, I can educate them on that. Like that is important. that monster venti Starbucks sugary thing that you're drinking, it's gonna affect your mental health if you do that all the time because of what it's doing to your gut, what it's doing to your body, right? It's gonna affect your mental health. And so I noticed it with me when I was treating my health issues, and then all of a sudden my mental health got so much better. And I decided to get certified in it and figure out and learn more about it so that I can educate people. And that is a big approach that I use in therapy. And I don't know if that's what makes the veteran population do well with me, but I have noticed that.
Mhm.
What got you into the nutrition aspect of everything?
Yeah, it's like I did it by mistake. So after I had my second baby, I developed health issues. So I lost my gallbladder like a few months after having my baby. I developed like horrible acid reflux, like life-changing horrible acid reflux. And through the Western medicine, just like my insurance, and they weren't really getting to the root cause. It was like, here's a medicine, here's a medicine, here's a medicine, and that's it. And so I wasn't feeling better. I was really struggling. And I decided to get into research. I got into functional medicine. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with functional medicine.
No, but I'm interested to hear because I don't have a gallbladder either. I lost it when I was 17.
Ah, okay. So functional medicine is getting to the root cause of whatever it is that your symptom is. So the disease is not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the symptoms, right? Because they have a root cause. And so that's a little different than like our Western traditional medicine. They just focus on the disease and deal with the pain. And so I went into functional medicine. I looked into it. I saw practitioners. I had the labs. I had all this work. I did all this work. I lost weight. I improved my symptoms. I learned that I could have saved my gallbladder. It was like a whole thing, right? And when I learned all that, it in the process of physically getting better, I mentally got better. Like we live such a fast-paced world, people don't have time for that, like, and so just slowing it down and learning to take care of your body can have really, really big results for your mental health.
It's interesting that you say that because a couple years ago, I was working in a bakery and it was a gluten-free, dairy-free bakery. And a mom, she came in with her autistic son and she asked, "What do you guys major in?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in psych." And she's like, "Have you read this article about gluten-free food for children that are autistic?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." And so she gave it to me because it was right there in her hand. And I started reading about it and I was so intrigued. I did more research about it, about how gluten food essentially harms a child or anybody that is autistic because I can get into the neurons and everything of it, and it's a whole thing. But I got so into it that was one of the reasons that got me into to think about going into neuropsychology, which is what I want to get my doctorate in. And so going into what you're saying, it's very interesting that you took a liking to that aspect and you've connected it to mental health because it's true. Food is the energy to our bodies, to our brains. And so if you don't have food, people get hangry. You don't function properly. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you brought up the gluten and dairy. So I'm gluten free, dairy free. Been like that for 7 years now. Was not an easy lifestyle to like switch to because I love cheese and I love bread. And just having to learn a new way, yeah, having to learn a new way to eat was not easy. And I think just while I was struggling, making all these changes, I was like, where's therapists that can help me with this? Because this is hard. Like they gave me a doctor and they gave me a chiropractor and they gave me all these different specialists within functional medicine, but nobody's care of mental health. Like this is a hard transition to changing your diet, especially being Mexican American where food is life. And so I started getting like the judgment and the pressure to eat like us, without knowing that I was on a mission to not eat like you. Like I need to change this because I'm sick, feel well. And so it was a hard process, just transitioning. And so people need support in that transition too, because it's emotionally hard and isolating when you have a specific diet or you have a specific lifestyle. There's like people that I don't really hang out with anymore because if I'm with them, I'm going to be really tempted. sweet certain things, or they just don't respect that I'm not gonna eat that, and they pressure me. So it's like it was a whole new lifestyle that I had to adapt to. Um, and now I do it more for my mental health than for anything else because that's what's shown the most improvement out of all the interventions that I've tried in the last 30 years of struggling with my mental health. That's been showing the most improvement to me.
Hmm. I kind of want to go back to, you know, talking to your therapist about your family and such, right? And I'm wondering if you have ever talked to your or your family about these experiences that may have caused like trauma or, you know, whatever the case is.
Yeah, I have. And it's hard because I feel like when you're healing from like childhood experiences and trauma, it kind of happens in stages, I feel. And so like there's like that denial, like, no, they could have never messed me up like that. You know, and
Yep.
then, for me, and then there was a lot my longest stage was anger, where I was like I'm doing all this work because you didn't do any work, because you did this, because you did that, because you had this relationship, and I learned these bad behaviors. And so I went through that for a while, and we had those hard conversations. Obviously, there was a lot of like that never happened.
Hmm.
That hasn't been. Mm-mm. Even though I have siblings that are there, and they're like, yeah, I did, and they're like, she's like, nope, no, and my dad was like, I don't know, I was working. So it's like everybody's kind of like, I didn't have anything to do with it. This is a you problem. And so there
Hmm.
was always that struggle with like, am I crazy? And everybody else sees me like perfect and struggling. Um, so yeah, we had those hard conversations, and then when I got to the next stage, there was like depression and sadness about it, and like a lot of healing. I did EMDR during that time, which was very helpful to do EMDR therapy. Um, a lot of inner child work and a lot of like self love and compassion, and really learning that you can only get it from yourself and all of those things. What in that stage is where the compassion from your parents kicked in, and I was like, oh, you poor thing. So you didn't know better, like you didn't mean for this. Like this was unintended consequence, and after that, it was more like acceptance. Okay, the physical boundaries are gone. I'm going to visit. I'm going to be part of the family. But the emotional boundaries are still there because as much as I love you and as much as you love me, there are things that we're not going to see eye to eye about. And I'm not going to bring up the past anymore. But I'm also going to set that boundary. And if I feel like you're overstepping, I'm going to go home. And if I feel like this is not okay, I'm going to speak up. So there was that change in our dynamic but it took years. It took years.
You said like in the beginning they were like, "What are you talking about? That didn't happen." Did they ever come to a point where they did take accountability for everything? Okay, so you just had to accept like it is what it is. That's just who they are, and there's nothing I can do about
Me,
it. So the
I
radical
had a
acceptance.
Yeah, and there was a lot of grieving for me. I
Mm.
remember grieving a lot. I felt like somebody had died. And after I went through that grieving and sad process, I came to acceptance and compassion for them. And a lot of that, what I needed, I got from myself in therapy and in my inner work and a lot of that inner child work. So I don't feel like they have to participate in it anymore. When
Hmm.
before I was like, where's my apology? Where's my this? Like, I don't need you to participate in my healing anymore because you don't have the ability to. So it's not fair for me to expect that from you. You don't have the tools. It's like it's not gonna happen. So I have to give it to myself. So I did a lot of that heart work and inner child work to come to the place where I was like, okay, we're good now. Like I forgive you, even though you never said I'm sorry. I still forgive you, and we're okay. So whatever is funky and I don't want to accept, it stops right here. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
passing that on. Like I'm gonna make my own mistakes, I know. And one day my kids are gonna be grown and say, "Hey, you did this, and hey, you did that, and you messed me up." Maybe, and that's where I'm gonna be aware and be like, "I'm sorry." And that makes the whole difference. Like I didn't know better. We didn't talk about it, so I'm sorry. And that I'm sorry, even if I don't think I'm at fault, can change our whole relationship. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna get that from my parents. That's never gonna happen. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
dream.
Yeah.
But I can stop it here and I can change it for the future. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of how I look at it.
No, and I 100% understand you. Unfortunately, I don't have like human children. I have fur children. Um,
Okay.
but no, I understand where you're coming from because there are things that I've noticed that, you know, for instance, like sleepovers. I used to be like, when I have kids, I'm gonna let them have sleepovers because you guys never let me, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But also being in this field, I now realize the dangers of what could potentially happen in a sleepover. And so I remember I used to tell my parents, "Oh, I'm gonna let my children do everything that you didn't let me do." In that aspect, yes, there are some things that now I agree with my parents.
The fact that you said that, like, if and when my kids call me out on something that I did, I'm going to say that I'm sorry, right? Like, that is so important because you know what you're doing? You're breaking generational curses, generational trauma, all that stuff. You're and that's like one of my biggest goals too. Like, if and when I have kids, like I want to make sure that like I don't put my kids through the same exact things that I went through growing up too. And especially with like especially not taking accountability for things and like I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to have these hard conversations with my kids so then they can be able to heal in the way that they deserve to, in the way that we didn't growing up. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's go
Especially
ahead.
being the first generation American. It's very different than being like being born in that country and then coming directly here and having to learn the different aspects, but also being born here and having your parents from the different culture and then fighting about the different views because you're born American but you live in a Hispanic culture, so you're kind of like it's two sides where like that the two the devil
Yeah.
and angel on the shoulder kind of like saying like, oh, you should do this, but your friends are doing this, and it's a different culture too. So there's always going to be that internal battle. I feel that's never going to go
Yeah.
away.
Like the identity, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
belong to both. And so they're both part of you. They're both part of your identity. And like trying to juggle both sides and figure out where you fit in. It's hard. It is so hard. Like only we understand the struggle. Like it's so hard. And that's a big reason why I wanted to start my own podcast. And that's a lot of what I talk about is that struggle of being in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being that first generation. And I'm glad that a lot of people are talking about it now. There's a lot of therapists out there that are talking about it because what we experience trying to fit into both sides, that caused some real issues for a lot of us. And like now we're having to heal a lot of stuff so that the next generation doesn't have the same experience, right? We're trying to prevent. I mean, we're gonna do our own mistakes and we're gonna have to heal other stuff, of course. But I feel like because we're putting in the work, we're already like 2 steps ahead
Mm-hmm.
of people that came before us. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of dive a little bit into your podcast. I know we talked about it in the beginning, but what led you to wanting to start it?
For me, something I've been talking about for years. For years. I have a sister who's also a therapist. And so we talked about starting it together years ago. And then, she had kids and I had kids and everything kind of happened and COVID and all these things. But I've been wanting to for years. I think that was what led me to want to start it is that identity thing. Like, dude, I've done all this work to heal all these things. I'm not alone. There's other people who feel the same way about growing up bilingual, growing up with two worlds. And I have some experience as a therapist that I want to like bring in, and I want to talk about how what things were helpful for me for a community that might not look for the help. So it's like the Spanish or bilingual people, they might not look for help because of the stigma. So if I can talk about my experience as a therapist, as somebody who struggles with her own mental health issues, as a mom, as somebody who understands the world of nutrition and mental health and all that, if I could bring that education and information to other people for free, um, I want to do that. So that's kind of where that idea came. I mean, it's been there for years, but it came really once I stopped working in medical social work and focused more in mental health, where I was like, okay, I think it's a good time to do it.
I was the one who was just like, I want to start a podcast because I also wanted to be able to bring my story out there too. I've been through it all, right? So like, I want to be able to show people like you are not alone, and especially those who are physically disabled. therapists, anybody, they're not alone in their struggles, right? Especially with the physically disabled, like they can do anything that they put their mind into. You know what I mean? So like to know that there's other therapists out there like you who also is not afraid to share their story and to tell other people like you can get through this too. It's so inspiring, and I really love meeting people like you who have the same mission. Now, with that being said though, like you have a podcast, like you're a therapist, you're a whole ass mom, like what are you doing for self-care? Like how are you taking care of yourself because you're always it sounds like you're always busy and you're always working no matter what you're doing.
Because I left medical social work, I have more time. So now I can like make my own appointments with my clients and take care of my kids, and then they go to school. So I have that time when they're in school. So I do have time. So I have to exercise, like nothing crazy, but I have to get at least 30 minutes to an hour of something, some kind of movement. Um, I do therapy when I feel I need it. And I love sitting outside, like nature. I love nature. I sit in the sun. When the weather is okay, I'll sit in the sun. I have my little vegetable garden that I like to read. Oh, I love to tap. So, the emotional freedom technique, like
Mm-hmm.
The
I love tapping. That is like my go-to for when I'm having like an episode. Because if you struggle with anxiety or you struggle with depression, it's like this, right? It's never just like yay, it's all good. It's always like this. And so when I'm going through like a bad episode, tap. If I need to upward the energy, I'll do more movement. But if I need to bring down the energy with anxiety, then I'll do the tapping and I'll bring down the anxiety. And that is like my go-to in the moment. I have the app on my phone and it's just like that's my go-to. I also have the Calm app that if I'm having like a hard time sleeping, I'll listen to a story or I'll listen to like thunder or rain. I do whatever I have to do. And I'm very proud of that because it took me a long time to get there. Like there was times where I would just lay in bed, like I can't sleep, but you have to sleep because if you reach out for like the app, you're gonna become dependent on it, and then you're never gonna get better. And so I would just have like these tortured nights where I would not do anything. And I learned like you have a symptom, take care of it. So now it comes up, I'll do it, and then I fall asleep.
What advice would you give somebody who is trying to get into the mental health field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about that when think about when I started and what would I have liked to know,
Mm-hmm.
so that I didn't waste so much time trying to be, perfect. Um, but I think the most important thing is that thing that you fear, people finding out about you, whether it's that you have mental health struggles, whatever it is that you fear people finding out about you, is probably going to be the thing that makes you a good therapist. And that was my fear. Please, no one find out that have mental health struggles, that I have depression, that I have anxiety, that I have panic attacks. Oh my God, how am I going to help you if I'm having panic attacks too? So it's like I had this thing, and that fear is actually it was wrong, and it's what makes me a really good therapist. The amount of Latina young girls that are in college that I see, they're having anxiety, they're the first generation, they have all this pressure, they're having panic attacks, and they're like, well, you don't know how horrible it feels. Yeah, I do. I do know. I know how horrible it feels. I know how it can feel so bad that you end up in the emergency room. We know that. Not just as a therapist, because I've experienced it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was my biggest fear. And now that I can say, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Isn't it a horrible feeling? It's terrible. It makes you feel like you're gonna die, right? And we have that moment where like, oh, she gets it. Not only does she have the knowledge, but she's been through it. Then it brings us like closer together. So for any new therapist, that thing you fear is probably going to be the thing that makes you a really good therapist. So don't fear it, embrace it, and then help yourself grow in that area, get knowledgeable in that area, get all the tools in that area. And then the other thing is you go first. Take care of yourself first, and then the other people.
We had such a great conversation, and I'm going to ask you the last question, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, where's your mental health at today? And if it's not in the best place, what are you doing to address that? Or what could you do to address that?
Okay, yeah, 1 to 10. So one being terrible,
One,
10 being great.
yeah.
sorry, yes, 10, yep.
Okay, I would say today my mental health is like a 7,
Okay, all right.
and it's never like in a 10. but I can get like to an 8 or a 9 when I'm in a really, really good place. And what's different during that time that I'm like at an 8 or a 9, for me is prioritizing my self-care time and its boundaries because I am somebody, empathic, or somebody I'm an introvert. And so, being around people a lot sometimes takes a lot of energy from me. And like even like going to Costco, there's some packed and stuff, and it's like, so I know that about myself, so I learned to accept that about myself. And when my mental health is the best, is when I put that boundary. Go, no, I'm not going to Costco. It's crazy there. Or no, I'm not gonna go to that party because I don't feel like being with all those people. And being okay with that, that's what helps me be in the best place. Once I start saying like, okay, well, I'll go for a little, then my mental health starts struggling a little because I'm doing something I don't want to do. I'm doing it to please other people. And so right now I'm doing, but when I'm like at a 5, it's because I'm just pleasing all these people and I'm not taking care of myself. I'm just, well, okay, fine. Yeah, I'll be there. Yes, I'll go. And I'm just going with the flow, but I'm not listening to myself. And then my body will talk. And my body is very loud, very, very loud. And I learned to like pick up the signals if it doesn't like something. And so if I answer the question, so yeah, like I was 7, but I'm better when I said them.
Okay.
Daisy, you have such a beautiful soul. Like you really do. And again, like I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate how open you are with your struggles. And I really do resonate with you on a lot of things, and especially being in the Hispanic culture too. And so thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for holding space, for therapists, and for people like me that want to share a message, with the world. And if anybody is listening and you can make a difference, to me, it's worth it. Because I just started the podcasting, I just started a page on Instagram, so I don't have like a lot of followers. But hey, if one person says, "Oh, that was helpful," and can improve, and I can reach them by being on this podcast, I'm just grateful that you allowed that platform for me to do that, and that you continue to do this so that other therapists have that chance to talk about what they're passionate about. So thank you, both of you. Thank you.
Of course. And if you could please one more time just tell us the name of your podcast and where we could follow you, that'd be great.
Yeah, the name of the podcast is Healing Herida, the Spanglish Guide. And my Instagram page is healing_herida.
Love it.
We love it. Again, Daisy, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, share this with your friends and family. You can listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on TikTok and Instagram, therapist_unmasked. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.